Hello, this is Dr. Joe Green, head pastor of St. Paul's Missionary Baptist Church in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, also the founder of the 2019 movement, and I want to share a couple of thoughts with you. This is part 3 of my Decoding Mystery Babylon series, and if you haven't listened to the first 2 episodes, I would encourage you to do so because we're going to kind of build on some of the foundation we've been laying. We're going to build on it. So if you go to my YouTube channel or my Sprecher, which is my podcasting site, and I think that you'll get a lot out of it. It'd be very beneficial to listen to the first 2 parts of the Decoding Mystery Babylon. And I think it's critical in this time, this day and this age, to know about this system that we're talking about, the Mystery Babylon system. It is an end-time system the Bible talks about. It's a system that is at the end of the age when Jesus, the Messiah, comes back and once and for all makes things right, wrong things right. He restores the order back to God's original intent and purposes. And so as we see the signs that we're moving closer and closer to that, then we should recognize that we are living in the last days, as I believe, as the Bible tells us. But anyway, let's unravel this a little bit. Let's unpack this. Revelation chapter 13, beginning with verse 4, it says, "So they worshiped the dragon who gave authority to the beast, and they worshiped the beast, saying, 'Who is like the beast, and who is able to make war with him?' And he was given a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and he was given authority to continue for 42 months. Verse 6 says, "Then he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God to blaspheme his name, his tabernacle, and those who dwell in heaven. It was granted to him to make war with the saints and to overcome them, and authority was given to him over every tribe and tongue and nation. All who dwell on the earth will worship him, whose names have not been written in the Lamb's book of life, slain from the foundation of the world. If anyone has an ear, let him hear." And so the Bible's telling us that this system, Mystery Babylon, is the whole world will be enthralled in this, and the only people that will be preserved from falling under the spell of Mystery Babylon is those whose names are written in the Lamb's book of life, slain from the foundation of the world. And it says they all worship the beast and the system of the beast. Now, Revelation 17 also talks in verse 3, "So he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast, which was full of the names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet, and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls, having in her hand a golden cup full of abominations and the filthiness of her fornication. And on her forehead a name was written, Mystery Babylon the Great, mother of all harlots and the abominations of the earth. And I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. And when I saw her, I marveled with great amazement." Now, of course, it's talking about the same thing, Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of our harlots and the abominations of the earth. In Revelation 13, we read here, it talks about the blasphemies and blaspheming his name. And blasphemy, it means to give godly attributes or godly worship to something that is not God. And so we know that the Bible shows us that the devil, Satan, Lucifer, the serpent, whatever you want to call him, is the one who opposes God. And so this system is a demonic system that opposes God. Now, in Revelation 17, we read it talks about the abominations of the earth. And if you get a chance to read in Leviticus 18, it goes into detail about the type of abominations that would be in this system. And in Leviticus 18, primarily the abominations that the Bible shows us that is a part of this Mystery Babylon system are all sexual perversions. Now, just so you know, and Gnostics will tell you this, and even the Bible tells us that sexual energy is probably the most powerful energy that human beings have, sexual energy. Sex is something that was created by God, and it was created for the purposes of creating life and also worshiping God. Because if you recall, in Revelation 2, when God created male and female, and he said the two shall become one flesh, that was the first thing that he said to man, come together, woman and man, and that's the image of God. That's the fire of God, as we read in Hebrew. That's the fire of God. That is the energy that God has given us, a very powerful energy. And likewise, when you pervert that energy with these abominations that the Bible talks about, it gives power to the occult or the serpent or the demonic spiritual principalities, which is why if you look in witchcraft or Luciferianism or whatever, there's always some kind of sexual element that's involved in it, because even those who don't worship God recognizes the power in sexual energy. And that's going to be important as we move forward in this talk. But I want you to understand the foundation of what it is that we're talking about here and how the enemy is using this strategically as a way to promote his kingdom over the kingdom of God. Now, one of the primary things that we see here, and we have seen throughout, is an attack on the family and family values. And that's an important thing for us to look at. Now, we've been talking about the Mystery Babylon system, the one world government or the New World Order, as we see, and how they're trying to complete the work that they began in Genesis chapter 11. So Genesis chapter 11 is the Tower of Babel. That story, they were completing a great work, they call it. But it was in opposition to God. It was in rebelliousness, and it was in opposing God's plan and his kingdom. And so because of that, when we see this pattern, we see, how the powers and principalities of the kingdom of darkness are trying to move their agenda forward even to today. So I'm not going to go back and when you get a chance to look at part 2, but during the time of in Europe, right? So what we have now that's in our today's culture, in American culture, or Western, what they call Western culture, it's based on European culture. And so the Greeks and the Romans and then the European culture has had a lot of influence on us. So when you look at European culture and what happened in Europe during the time of the Enlightenment period and the Industrial Revolution and those type of things, there was a shift that occurred. And I talked about it in detail in part 2, so if you get a chance to go back and listen to it. But anyway, you have these powers that be that wanted to form a one world governmental system, and they had to come up with a way to get the masses to get the masses under subjection, for lack of a better description. And so you had the communism is a form of governmental system that looks to make a universal governmental authority, right? It's a one world governmental system. So communism, you have socialism, you have all these other things that happen, and they're all meant to oppress the masses. The ruling elite will be in charge, and they will be the ones that will determine things. And so anyway, let's look at this. We're going to talk about the attack on the family. The communism, you have Marxism, you have Karl Marx, you have Friedrich Engels, and you have some of these other people that were really trying to move towards a one world governmental system. And Friedrich Engels was one of the people who really looked at how they could get the people to buy into being subjugated to their ruling authority. So how do you get that done? In 1917, you had the Russian Revolution. It was a lot of bloodshed, and you have many other revolutions, which was the overthrow of monarchies and dictatorships. But really what happened is they positioned it in a way to say that they were trying to shift power to the masses, right? Giving the workers and the working class people the power, but that's not really what was happening. What was happening is they used that narrative as a way just to shift power from the ruling class at the time to them. That's what happened. But they had to get some buy-in. So, of course, you had the overthrow of governmental systems. 1917, the Russian Revolution is one of the main things that happened. And then, they were trying to determine how to move forward, right? So even though there was a lot of violence and bloodshed, they wanted to come up with a way not only to be able to do this around the world with least amount of bloodshed, but to get the people to buy into it. So one of the first things they realized is they had to attack the families. So like I said, Engels, Marx, and some of the other people in the day that was really associated with the communist revolution. I'm going to read some of the facts. There's if you get a chance to read some of Engels' writings or Karl Marx's writings or some of these other people, you'll see kind of the thought processes that happen. It reads in this one, this is the origins of the European thought that affects us. It is a peculiar fact, stated Engels a few months after Marx died, that with every great revolutionary movement, the question of free love comes to the foreground. By the mid to late 19th century, it was clear to advocates and opponents alike that many socialists shared a propensity to reject the institution of the family in favor of free love, if not in practice, at least as an idea. Now, think about this. This is free love. It means that one of the things they had to do, as I talked about last time, is you have what's called critical theory. So you have to attack all the institutions that were prevalent in society as a whole in order to shift the power structure, to overthrow the current power structure. So they always promoted free love. Now, as I said to you in Revelation 17 and also in Leviticus 18, it talks about the abominations that this system has, and they're all it's mainly based on sexual perversion, materialism, lust, and all that other stuff. So these people are saying the same thing. They're saying they're trying to promote free love, which means take the restraints off of monogamy and all that other stuff. You shouldn't use discretion in your sexual, your sexual habits or whatever you do sexually. Free love, and let me say this before I move forward. So the pattern happened, you had, like I said, World War I, you had World War II, and you had the Nazis. So after World War II, they took the same philosophy and brought it to America. So Operation Paperclip and Project Mockingbird, especially Operation Paperclip, they took some of the Nazi scientists and thinkers, the intellectuals, and they brought them here to America, and they began to use the same strategy that the Nazis began to employ in order to get buy-in from the public. And so you had 1950s and 1960s, you had the drug, the drug culture, you had the hippie movement, you had all these things, you had rock and roll that became prevalent, of that day. And when you look through the research, it was all orchestrated in order to promote the same idea of free love, of promiscuity, of a lack of discretion, right? It's your thing, do what you want to do, all that kind of stuff. And that all stems from also the occult with Aleister Crowley and the law of Thelema. So Aleister Crowley was the person who was very instrumental in bringing the occult, the Gnostic, the Mystery Babylon religion into the 20th century in Europe. And the law of Thelema states, do whatever you will is the whole of the law. Do whatever you want to do. And we'll talk about that. That's a form of hedonism. We'll talk about it. But ultimately, it brings all the perversions. So they go against the norms. They go against monogamy. They go against the family values that help to stabilize a society. And they begin to promote the idea that sexual freedom is the key. So here, let me read more of this article. A Prussian agent reported back to Marx's brother-in-law, the Prussian Minister of the Interior, that the German communists in London, which Karl Marx was associated with, were so unusually dangerous for the state, the family, and the social order. So they're saying that the most dangerous thing from the state, the most dangerous thing that would hinder this one world governmental takeover, the promotion of communism and all this other stuff, they said that the most unusually dangerous thing for the state is the family and the social order. So they recognize that when you have strong families and you have a social order, when you have the morals and values that many of our Western Judeo-Christian Western culture espouse, they said that was the largest danger to the state taking over, to the influx of the one world governmental system. They recognize that. Significant exposure to the concept of the abolition of the family for Karl Marx probably came with his stay in Paris, when he first imbibed communist ideas and held strong discussions with numerous socialists and other radicals who congregated in the French capital. Charles Fourier's ideas, he was a person that was before Karl Marx. He was one of the people that helped to shape the ideology of Karl Marx and Engels and some of the other people. Charles Fourier's ideas played a significant role in the socialist movement in France in the 1830s and 1840s, and his idea of the family were propagated in the first volume of the Ouvriers Completes, published in 1841. Fourier advocated the replacement of monogamous marriage with a system allowing much greater latitude for sexual passions, since he believed that monogamy was an institution contrary to human nature and was thus an impediment to human happiness. He also proposed that children be raised communally, so society would be one big harmonious family rather than fractured into competitive, squabbling family units. Now let me break this down for you. So we just read how they said that the family, traditional family, and traditional values were the biggest threat to them promoting their takeover, governmental takeover. And here they said that they're going to go against monogamy and that children shouldn't be raised just by the family, but the state should raise your children. Now, a lot of people may say that sounds crazy, but let me explain something to you. So from a political standpoint, political thought, you have three primary streams. You have conservatives, you have liberals, and you have progressives. Now, conservative ideology means that we want the status quo. We want to keep what's going on now. Liberals are people that want to change. They want change to occur. And progressives are basically, for lack of a better term, are a more aggressive form of liberalism. So they want it happening faster. And these are very generic definitions, so please forgive me. But I want to say that so you understand what's happening, because it is the liberal progressive ideology that looks to change power from one to the other. And that's what the communists wanted to do. That's what Lucifer wanted to do, which is why in Saul Alinsky's book, who wrote Rules for Radicals, he was, it was the blueprint that a lot of the liberals have taken and progressives have taken. He gives a shout out to Lucifer, who was the first rebel who tried to overthrow God, right? So it's based in Satanism, Luciferianism, whatever you want to call it, the Mystery Babylon system. And so, of course, they are espousing the same things that we talked about, the abominable things, the perversion of sex. Monogamy is against human nature, they said. And they said they wanted a society where you can fulfill all your sexual pleasures if you want. And so that is what they're promoting. And you see that in America is being promoted. In the 50s and beyond, you had the country was more conservative. And so they espoused family values. And it doesn't mean that they didn't always have perversions. It doesn't mean that people didn't do stuff that they shouldn't. But what I'm saying is society as a whole did not accept it publicly. So even when people did things that we call perverse now, they hid it for the most part, or you had little pockets over there where you can go there and everybody knew over in that place over there, the red light district or whatever, you can go there and you can partake in perversions or whatever lust you wanted, but society as a whole did not acknowledge it. So now you have this shift that now society as a whole is not only acknowledging it, but is promoting it. It's promoting it to a place where if you espouse traditional family values, you're considered an oddball. Right. So the tables have turned. Things are turned upside down. We're in the time that the Bible talks about, woe to him who call good evil and evil good. Right. There's an inversion. Romans 1 says, because they exchanged the truth for a lie, they took the truth for unrighteousness. And what it's talking about in Romans 1, it's talking about the time when people take what is true and they deem it to be unrighteous. So if you said marriage should only be between one man and one woman, and you should only have sex with your spouse, and you shouldn't have sex with the same sex or anything like that, or you shouldn't be sexually promiscuous publicly. If you say those things now, they say that you are homophobic, that you are transphobic, that you are, narrow-minded or that you are judgmental. They say all these things. They deem what we believe that was moral and just to be wrong now. And so what's happening is this thing called hedonism that is really becoming prevalent. And, as I mentioned, Aleister Crowley, who wrote the book, The Law of Thelema, which a lot of the rock and roll stars and a lot of people nowadays are going, Aleister Crowley called himself 666, the most wickedest man alive. He called himself the Beast, right? He recognized that he was promoting demonic ideology. And the Law of Thelema that he wrote And thelema in Greek just means will. So the law of the will is do whatever you want is the whole of the law. Do whatever you want to do, right? Don't let anybody tell you something is wrong. Whatever you feel like you want to do, you should do it, right? And that's the definition of what we call hedonism. And hedonism is really being promoted. If you look at popular music, especially the hip hop music and rappers, they basically promoting a lifestyle of doing whatever you want to do, right? Drink as much as you want to do, take drugs, have sex, materialism to the umpteenth degree. Right? You look at some of these rappers, they walk around with big wads of cash and they're popping bottles and they're partying all the time and they're just having sex and doing whatever they want to do. They're promoting hedonism, and it's intentional. It's a way of weakening the society so that the powers that be can take over these people that are pushing for one more governmental system. Let me read a little bit about hedonism. When the term hedonism is used in modern literature or by non-philosophers in everyday talk, it means basically a person who seeks out pleasure for themselves without any particular regard for their own future well-being or for the well-being of others. According to non-philosophers, then, a stereotypical hedonist is someone who never misses an opportunity to indulge of the pleasures of sex, drugs, and rock and roll, or now hip-hop music, even if the indulgences are likely to lead to relationship problems, health problems, regrets, or sadness for themselves or others. Now that's where we're at. We're in the age of hedonism, that they tell you to do whatever you want to do. Don't think about, what do they call, is this thing that the young people say now, YOLO, you only live once, right? I saw some of the popular, people in popular culture, they say, die young, live hard and die young, or whatever the case. This philosophy of just hedonism, do whatever you want to do. And, when we, more conservative people or people that are Christian or have family values, when we say, no, you shouldn't do certain things, you should have discretion, you should do, this and that, even in popular culture, you have you have people like Rihanna, Beyonce, Lady Gaga, Miley Cyrus, that they are promoting this over sexuality of women. Right? Do whatever you want to do. If you tell women to be modest, you had this lady who she did this thing called the slut walk. And Amber Rose, she was a stripper and very popular person in popular culture for a while. She had this thing called the slut walk. And so they were basically bragging about being what's called sluts. And I don't like to use that word, but that's actually what they called it. And so when people talk against that, they said that you're slut shaming and it's wrong for you to slut shame. So it's just this inversion of what's right and what's true, but it's intentional, and it's promoting an ideology that is meant to be destructive to society as a whole, in order for them to weaken individuals as a way that they will become more dependent on the state, more dependent on the government. You think about in free love, and I've heard many stories about the hippie movement in the 60s and Haight-Ashbury out in California. And it was a lot of broken people from that, because they just did drugs. They had free love. People would just sleep around, and there was no type of accountability. There was no type of structure or whatever. So you had people having babies, and they would just leave the kids. The kids grew up all messed up because they didn't have any structure or discipline. The adults end up, addicted, strung out on drugs or whatever the case may be, because that's the natural result of living a life in that vein, which is why God puts restraints on us, because he understands what happens if we just, throw caution to the wind and just do whatever we want to do. Excuse me. Philosophers commonly refer to everyday understanding of hedonism as folk hedonism. Folk hedonism is a rough combination of motivational hedonism and hedonistic egoism. And I'm going to define those terms for you. Motivational hedonism, more commonly referred to as a less descriptive label, psychological hedonism, is the theory that the desires to encounter pleasure and to avoid pain guide all of our behavior. Most accounts of motivational hedonism include both conscious and unconscious desires for pleasure, but emphasize the latter. Epicurus, William James, Sigmund Freud, Jeremy Bentham, John Stuart Mill, and even Charles Darwin have all argued for varieties of motivational hedonism. Now, when Sigmund Freud was a famous psychologist and psychiatrist, and you got to realize that these people were all elitists. They were trying to push towards a one world governmental system. And so when they're promoting these things, they're doing it from a standpoint of that this is good for the masses. But of course, ultimately, it was a way of garnering control over the people. So, and think about this society now where you have, as I talked about last time in part two, you have political correctness and critical theory. So political correctness means that, you can't say certain things because you might offend people. Some of the major colleges and university, which is really a breeding ground for many of these Marxist ideas, that they have safe zones where they don't let people come on the campus who disagree with the liberal ideology or progressive ideology, right? So you've had conservative speakers recently that have been banned from college campuses because they said they want to have safe zones where people won't say things that offend you. So this is basically, psychological hedonism. That you should never have anything. You should always have pleasure and always avoid pain. That you shouldn't be in a situation where people are saying things that make you uncomfortable or offend you. Now I'll say for the record, that's not how life works. There is no expectation that you won't be offended in your life or that you won't experience pain. As a matter of fact, that's part of life. And God himself creates an environment where we have to go through pain in this world system. Think about how you're born. When Adam and Eve, and that's a result of the fall. So after Adam and Eve ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, he told Eve that you're going to, have pain in childbirth, right? So we know when women have babies, there's pain. They have to push. They have contractions. All this stuff happens. When a baby comes into the world, most of the time, the first thing they start doing is crying because that's how it was set up, and it's meant to strengthen us and build us up. And, so we won't live in an environment where there is a lack of offense or lack of pain. That's just part of the human experience. These things are detrimental, but because, the media and popular culture is pushing this ideology, and the history of this ideology is very much grounded in the Karl Marx, Marxist, communist, socialist, progressive mindset. We see this, and it's very clear that the intention is not to make society better, but weaken society to a place where it can be taken over. The masses will give up their rights of freedom and free will to this larger governmental system, this one world governmental system that they want to have to take over. And even psychologists will tell you, anyone who studies positive psychology, this is from Psychology Today. Anyone who studies positive psychology would be surprised that hedonism weakens people. Positive psychologists have established that merely to have a good time in the present moment does not provide the basis of a life of well-being. There are many other important factors, for example, a sense of purpose and meaning, positive relationships, regular periods of flow, absorption or engagement in activities, a positive thinking style, and a sense of accomplishment and achievement. Having regular contact with nature, practicing acts of altruism, which is to do things for other people and not be self-centered or self-absorbed, and a sense of self-development are also important sources of well-being. So psychologists will tell you that living a hedonistic lifestyle is detrimental for you. It doesn't turn out good. It never does. You look at some of the famous rock and roll stars or movie stars. They have all the money, all the fame and fortune, and many of them are depressed and they kill themselves, or they just live a life miserable. They end up in a drug rehab, or they end up down and out and broke because they have just went and did everything they wanted to do. Even Aleister Crowley, the person who ushered in what they call the age of Eon, or the New Age, into the 20th century and in Europe. He died. It was reported that he died broke and alone with syphilis and out of his mind because of his drug addiction, because of heroin addiction. And so that's where it leads to. So it's interesting that even though he ended up there, these people are following after his lead. He's very popular. Many of the rock and roll stars from the 60s followed after his teachings, Aleister Crowley's teachings. And so it's just it's quite interesting, but understand that it's a pattern, and it has happened and always happened. And God has warned us about it. So when we read in the book of Leviticus, it was written about 4,000 or 5,000 years ago, and God gave a warning then. Even before that, we knew that that's the result of living that type of lifestyle of sexual depravity or sexual perversion, or just living your life based on pleasure. It never ends up good. It always, if you don't live a life of trying to make society better and meditating on good things and of high moral value and high moral caliber, you're gonna be miserable in life, point blank. That's how it always works. God told us that. We see it. There's a historical record of these things happening, but yet we still have popular culture that's promoting these ideas. I call it a cannibalistic society because it's actually devouring itself. It's promoting the very things that's meant for your own destruction. You know, I wrote a book called The Ministry of Reconciliation, and in the Ministry of Reconciliation, I have a segment, a chapter that I talk about sin, and sin is like a virus to the human condition. So think about sin as a virus. What does a virus do? A virus goes into a host, and it actually goes about the destruction of the very host that it's a part of. So, for instance, a virus or a disease or a dysfunction, right? If you had, let's say diabetes, that's a disease or a dysfunction. Diabetes gets inside your body, and people that are diabetic usually crave sugar, and sugar is one of the main things that is like poison to your body. You know, if you had high cholesterol or high blood pressure, you might crave salt or fried foods or anything that would really, it would destroy you. So that's what sin does. Sin is a thing that wants to destroy its host. And so when we engage in sin, it's a self-destructive behavior that actually destroys us. And that's what the devil wants, right? He comes to kill, steal, and destroy. So anyway, hedonism, weak versions of motivational hedonism hold the desires to seek pleasure and avoid pain often or always have some influence on our behavior. Weak versions are generally considered to be uncontroversial, true, and not specially used for philosophies. And so these philosophers of the Enlightenment period or Europe, they espoused these things and promoted these ideas just like they're promoting it now, but it's really for the destruction of society, to weaken society so that it can be controlled by the ruling class. Now, what does the Bible say about that? There was a person that we read in the Bible, a very famous person by the name of King Solomon. You guys might have heard of him. King Solomon was the son of King David, who was considered one of the greatest kings ever. You know, Israel was a world superpower when David and Solomon were kings, right? And so the Bible says that King Solomon was not only the wisest man in the world, but he was also the richest man in the history of the world. Right. And so we have some insight into how these things play out by looking at King Solomon's life. The book of Ecclesiastes is Solomon's writing, the book of the Proverbs and Ecclesiastes. And so in Ecclesiastes chapter 1, this is Solomon writing, the words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem, vanity of vanities, says the preacher, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. Now, when he writes the book of Ecclesiastes, it's at the end of a long journey. And so what Solomon did was Solomon, actually the wealthiest man in the world and the wisest man in the world, he engaged in anything he wanted to do pleasure-wise. It was reported that he had about 1,000 women. He had like 600 wives or 700 wives and 300 concubines or vice versa, 300 wives, whatever. He had about 1,000 women, you know. So if you think about sexual fulfillment and gratification, he went all the way to the hilt with it. You know, he was the wealthiest man in the world, and he engaged in materialism without any kind of restraints. Nothing could be withheld from him, right? And he was so popular and so famous, even the Queen of Sheba, who's considered one of the most beautiful and powerful women in the world, loved King Solomon and came to him, and it was reported that they had a child together. She was so enamored by him. So he did everything. He had the most money in the world. He engaged in the most physical pleasures in the world, and he had the most fame and fortune at the time. And this is what King Solomon writes. He says, all is vanity. He's saying all this is nothing. This is irrelevant. It is not fulfilling. So in Ecclesiastes chapter 2, verse 10, here's what Solomon says. Whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. I did not withhold my heart from any pleasure. From my heart rejoice in all my labor. That means he was full of pride of all the successes he had in life. And this was my reward from all my labor. Then I looked on all the works that my hands had done, and on the labor which I had toiled. And indeed, all was vanity and grasping for the wind. There was no profit under the sun. He said he accomplished a lot in life. Nothing that he wanted to do, he withheld from himself. And then he says, but that's all vanity. It's like grasping for the wind. Verse 18 of Ecclesiastes chapter 2, he says, then I hated all my labor in which I had toiled under the sun, because I must leave it to the man who will come after me. He's saying I could build this big kingdom and these beautiful houses and all this other stuff, and then when I die, somebody else is going to have it. Verse 19, and who knows whether he will be wise or a fool, yet he will rule over all my labor in which I toiled, and in which I have shown myself wise under the sun. This is also vanity. Therefore I turned my heart and despaired of all the labor in which I had toiled under the sun. He's saying he was depressed. He was down and out. He came to a low point because he realized that all the efforts he had, all the stuff he built up, all the materialism, all the pleasures, it really didn't amount to anything. Ecclesiastes chapter 6, beginning with verse 1, there's an evil which I have seen under the sun, and it is common among men, a man to whom God has given riches and wealth and honor, so that he lacks nothing for himself of all he desires, yet God does not give him the power to eat of it, but a foreigner consumes it. This is vanity, and it is an evil affliction. If a man begets 100 children and lives many years, so that the days of his years are many, but his soul is not satisfied with goodness, or indeed he has no burial, I say that a stillborn child is better than he. So he's saying that even if you did all this stuff and accomplished, it really doesn't mean anything if you don't do positive stuff, if your soul is not right. It says if your soul is not satisfied. And so again, we know that to be true. God is telling us in his word that materialism, sexual depravity, and doing whatever you feel like doing only brings distress and destruction, and it brings depression on you. That's what we see in the society nowadays. We see our, young people that, and not just young people, but popular cultures promoting the idea that you should do whatever you want to do. Don't let anybody tell you that you can't do something. And we have people that are more depressed than ever. United States, which is the wealthiest country in the world, and we have more stuff in this time than the generations past, but yet we consume more antidepressant drugs than any other nation in the world. Our forefathers, our grandfathers and great grandparents, I know as an African American, they came through slavery, Jim Crow, racism, poverty, all those things they came through. But yet they seem to be more emotionally stable than some of the young people nowadays who have more. I know young kids who have a lot of material stuff. They have a nice house that they can live in. They have, material stuff. Some of these kids you see them with $200 pairs of sneakers on. You have some of them with iPhones, and they're young teenagers, but yet they're upset, they're distressed, they're bitter, they're angry, there's depression, and even suicidal tendencies. So we see that these things don't satisfy you. And I'm going to read this, and as I bring this to a close, Ecclesiastes chapter 12, beginning with verse 13, this is what Solomon says. Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is man's all. For God will bring every work into judgment, including every secret thing, whether good or evil. He says out of all these things, he had all the physical pleasures in the world. He had all the fame and fortune, all the material stuff he wanted. But the end of the matter is fear God and keep his commandments. As a matter of fact, some of the chapters, if you read through Ecclesiastes, it talks about how wealth doesn't bring happiness. It talks about that you should, connect to God, develop a relationship with God early in life at a young age. It says all these things that the Bible says, because the Bible tells us to train up a child in the way they should go. When she is older or he is older, he will not depart from it. All these things that the Bible has told us and has confirmed with us that that's the way. The world is doing just the opposite. And so in this segment of Decoding Mystery Babylon, we have to look at popular culture and how it's intentionally promoting ideologies and lifestyles and perspectives that are self-destructive, and they won't lead to happiness. They won't lead to anything except for weakened, depressed, down and out people who will willingly give up their rights, give up their freedom for convenience sake. That's why the Bible tells us in 2 Thessalonians that when they yell peace and safety, sudden destruction is upon them. Because just like during the time of Genesis 11 and Nimrod promised that he was going to provide for the needs of the people and to protect them and keep them safe. So they willingly gave up their rights to this governmental system of Nimrod, and God intervened. When you look at communism and socialism, their ultimate goal is for the people to give up their individual rights and to submit to the government, because the government's going to take care of their needs and keep them safe. Right? You had things like the Patriot Act when they had terrorism, that people began to give up a lot of their rights under the guise of protection. And the communists, they state in their manifesto that they're trying to get rid of property rights. They're trying to destroy the traditional family values, and they're trying to do all those things because they understand that the people are more easily controlled if they have weakened family structures and you have a lack of biblical moral values. Then it causes for the destruction of the people, which is why the Bible tells us in Revelation 13 that when the beast system is fully engaged and all those who will worship the beast, except for those whose names are written in the Lamb's Book of Life, then you'll have to take the mark of the beast, and you won't be able to buy or sell unless you take the mark. But what did God tell his people in Deuteronomy? He says, it is me who gives you the ability to gain wealth. He says, remember when I brought you out of Egypt, and for 40 years your clothes didn't wear out. I fed you manna every day. You didn't get sick or anything like that. He's promised to keep us as long as we trust him. But there's a system that's at play that tells you not to trust God, but to trust the government. This has been Dr. Joe Green, and until stay tuned for the next segment of Decoding Mystery Babylon. Hope you guys have a wonderful day. Peace and blessings to you. Shalom, shalom.